At 58, I thought I had it all. A lake house most only dream of, $1 million business I built from scratch, and a wife who stood by me through the worst storms. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and said 6 words that gutted me more than any betrayal in business ever had. You chose control over trust again. I stood in that empty lake house, papers in hand, thinking I was protecting what mattered. But I had sold something far more valuable than wood and water. I had sold a piece of us. For years, I believed if I worked hard enough, earned enough, controlled enough, everything would be fine. Melissa would understand. Emma, our daughter, would get it when she was older. But memories aren't made on balance sheets, and love doesn't grow in silence. What happened next shattered the illusion I'd built my life around. My wife left. My daughter stopped calling, and for the first time, the house wasn't empty because we were out chasing life. It was empty because I'd driven them away. This isn't a story about real estate or family drama. It's about what it costs to win at everything except what matters, and how I learned, far too late, that trust, once sold, is harder to buy back than any house. If you've ever convinced yourself that your intentions were enough, that providing was the same as loving, then you need to hear what happened next. Because redemption doesn't come wrapped in apologies. It comes in what you're willing to lose to earn your way back. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and I'm 58 years old. 27 years ago, I stood barefoot in the dewy grass outside a half-renovated lake house, watching my wife paint the shutters a bright, defiant yellow. It was our wedding gift to each other, a symbol of permanence, of building something together from the ground up. That summer, we made promises on creaky floorboards and kissed under mosquito-filled porch lights. We dreamed about a life full of barbecues, laughter, and a little girl named Emma someday running across that dock barefoot like her mother had once done. Then life happened. I built Whitmore Realty from a folding table and a landline phone. One deal led to another, and the weekends at the lake turned into quarterly check-ins. Eventually, the place became more memory than ritual, frozen in time, like a snow globe we shook only during Christmas. Melissa stopped mentioning it after a while. Emma preferred city summers, and I told myself it was enough just to keep the lights on, to maintain the taxes, the upkeep, the illusion. Until 3 months ago. Melissa and I were having our usual late Sunday coffee, the kind where she scrolled Zillow listings and I reviewed spreadsheets. That's when she said it, calmly, as if suggesting a new couch. I think we should sell the lake house. My sister needs a place after the divorce. A condo downtown would be perfect. I blinked. Sell it? It's just sitting there, she shrugged. She's alone, starting over. We hardly use it. You said yourself we need to simplify. I didn't respond, not because I agreed, but because something inside me buckled. That house wasn't a building. It was the only thing I had ever created with love at the center. Not money, not strategy, just love. But I said nothing. I nodded slowly, the same way I'd nodded when I missed Emma's first dance recital, or her graduation dinner, or our anniversary 2 years ago, because work was important, because this deal could change everything, because there would always be more time. That was the first crack. I told myself I needed to think, to weigh options, but what I really did was log into the property records the next day. That's when I found it. The title had already been prepped. The agent listed wasn't mine. Melissa had been talking to her sister and a broker. For how long? Weeks? Months? A mixture of betrayal and fear surged in me. I told myself it wasn't about control. I told myself she'd moved first, so I was reacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't bear the thought of that house, our house, becoming someone else's escape hatch. So I made a call. I still had connections, old favors. I reached out to a private buyer I knew had cash and interest in lakeside properties. Discreet. Fast. The papers were signed within 12 days. I didn't tell Melissa. I told myself I needed to soften the blow, find the right time. But there's never a right time to explain that you went behind your wife's back because you didn't trust her judgment. Or worse, because you didn't want to face your own failure to protect what mattered. A week after the sale closed, Melissa walked in holding a manila folder. "This address," she said, eyes narrowed. "It's sold. Why is your name on the closing documents?" My silence answered for me. Her face changed. Not rage, worse, disbelief, disappointment. "You sold it without me?" "I had to," I said, too quickly. "It was going to your sister. It's not just a house, Mel. That's our life, our past." She stepped back like I'd slapped her. "So you decided it was worth more than my word, than my reasons?" I wanted to explain. To talk about the summer nights, about our laughter on that dock. But the truth is, I didn't sell it out of nostalgia. I sold it out of fear. Fear that I was losing the only place where I'd been a good husband, a good father. But then came the second gut punch. 2 days later, I learned who the buyer was. Carter Hale, a name I hadn't thought of in 10 years. A competitor I'd crushed in a commercial land grab. He'd lost millions, I'd made partner. And now, somehow, he owned my lake house. The same dock where I taught Emma how to bait a hook. Now belonged to a man I'd humiliated. I stared at the confirmation email, hands trembling, the irony too sharp to ignore. The house wasn't just gone, it was claimed. By the past I thought I'd beaten. By choices I made in boardrooms that were now coming back in silence and brick. Melissa didn't speak to me for 5 days, and when she did, her voice was colder than that lake in November. "You didn't just sell the house," she said. "You sold the last place we were happy." Melissa didn't cry when she found out. That's what haunts me the most. She didn't scream, throw things, or demand explanations. Instead, she went quiet in that terrifying way only someone who's just watched a part of themselves disappear can go quiet. I found out later what broke her wasn't my betrayal. It was the timing. 3 days after our confrontation, she drove her sister, Lila, out to the lake house. Lila had finally agreed to leave the city after months of post-divorce chaos. Melissa was thrilled, hopeful even. She imagined them walking the dock together, remembering summers of childhood, laughing through the pain of everything they'd lost. Instead, they pulled into the gravel driveway to find a contractor's truck in the yard. Strangers hauling furniture through the front door. The porch light replaced. The yellow shutters, painted by Melissa's hands decades ago, already a shade of lifeless beige. Lila told me Melissa stood frozen for almost 2 minutes before speaking. "Did someone die?" she asked the man on the lawn. He looked confused. "You must be the wife. Carter said he hoped you'd stop by. Offered you the dock chairs if you wanted them." Melissa got back into the car, drove in silence all the way home. Lila told me later she didn't speak a word for hours. Just stared at her hands like they were broken instruments. When she finally did speak to me again, it was at 11:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was still staring at that cursed confirmation email from Carter. "You thought you were protecting me," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of delusion. I looked up. She stood in the doorway in her robe, hair still damp from her evening shower. You thought I was reckless, irrational, emotional, so you took control again? I didn't want to lose it, I whispered. It's ours, Mel, yours and mine. No, she said. It was never yours. Not really. That stung, but I didn't speak. I let her walk into the room and sit on the edge of the bed, her back to me. When I was 9, she said, I fell through the ice at Deerbrook. My parents weren't home. I was out there alone like an idiot chasing Lila's dog. My stomach tightened. She jumped in after me. I was unconscious by the time she pulled me out. Lila, who never got credit for anything, dragged me out of that lake and gave me her coat while she screamed for help. I didn't move. I couldn't. She has nothing now. Her husband took everything. I just wanted to give her something safe, something that mattered. That house. It was supposed to mean something again. Not for me, for her. And just like that, the justification I'd told myself collapsed. This wasn't a whim. It wasn't an impulsive charity. It was a debt, etched into her bones. I'm sorry, I said, but even I knew how useless that sounded. Melissa didn't respond. She just stared ahead, at nothing, and said the one thing I dreaded more than anything else. You're just like your father. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I sat alone in the kitchen, waiting for the inevitable fallout to spread. And it did, swiftly. Emma arrived by noon. Her knock was sharp. She walked in without waiting for permission, holding her phone like a weapon. Is it true? She demanded. I didn't ask what she meant. I nodded. Yes. You sold it? Without even asking? It's more complicated than that. She raised her hand. Don't explain. Just tell me one thing. Did you forget? I blinked. Forget what? She stared at me, mouth twisting as if unsure whether to laugh or cry. You told me, Dad, on my 13th birthday. You said, when you're 30, that lake house is yours. It's our family place. And one day it'll be where you teach your kids to fish. I remember every word. Do you? I didn't. Not completely. It came back in pieces. Me holding a slice of cake. Her in pigtails. Asking if she could paint the dock purple someday. I'd smiled and made a grand promise. The kind adults toss out like candy, never thinking they'd be remembered. But she remembered. I was going to get married there, Emma said, her voice breaking. That dock was mine. That tree had my name carved in it. You didn't just sell wood and walls. You sold every version of me that believed you cared more about family than deals. She turned before I could stand, heading for the door. Emma, wait. Please. She paused, hand on the handle. You always told me your father cared more about money than people, she said. You swore you'd be different. Then she walked out. I stood alone in a house I'd once bought with hope, now hollowed by choices I could no longer defend. And for the first time, I understood why silence hurts more than screams. Because when the people you love stop arguing, it means they've stopped believing you can change. The boardroom was buzzing, analysts whispering, legal reviewing slides, the kind of corporate energy I used to feed off like a drug. But all I could think about was the voicemail on my phone. She's gone, Lila had said. Mom passed last night. I stared at the conference table. 10 figures on paper, all waiting for my approval. Promotions, bonuses, projections. I stood. I have to leave, I said. My CFO blinked. We're voting on. I said I have to leave. That was the first time I'd walked out of a meeting in 23 years. I drove 3 hours to the funeral home in silence. When I arrived, the chapel was full. The pews brimming with quiet sobs, muted conversation, the rustle of tissues and old regrets. Melissa didn't look at me. She sat in the front row with Lila, hands clasped, eyes forward. Emma was on the other side of the aisle, next to a man I hadn't met, presumably her boyfriend. She didn't wave, didn't smile. I sat alone, 3 rows back, not out of shame, though I had plenty of that, but because I didn't know where I belonged anymore. When the service ended, I stepped outside for air. That's when I saw it. Melissa and Lila talking to a man in a suit, exchanging what looked like an envelope. Later, Lila approached me while Melissa stayed inside. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "She was my mother-in-law," I answered. "Of course I came." Lila looked down, hesitated. "Thank you, for the house, even if it didn't happen the way we hoped." I didn't respond. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know, Melissa only agreed to sell it because I begged her not to loan me more money. She's been supporting me since 2015. Rent, therapy, groceries." I blinked. "She never told you?" Lila asked, already knowing the answer. "No," I said. She nodded slowly. It was eating her alive. Not because she didn't want to help, but because she didn't want to lie to you anymore. And just like that, 1,000 missing pieces slammed into place. The Zillow listings, the arguments she never voiced, the tightness in her shoulders every time her phone rang. She wasn't trying to sell our memories. She was trying to sever a rope tied to guilt. I had never asked, never truly asked what she was carrying, because I had assumed her silence meant everything was fine. And now, it was too late. When I returned home that evening, the house felt quieter than usual, colder somehow. Melissa's closet was half empty, drawers open, some picture frames missing. On the kitchen table sat a note. "Staying with Emma for now. Don't call." Just those 5 words. The couch still smelled like her perfume. Her coffee mug was still in the sink, but she was gone. I wandered the house like a ghost, eventually making my way up to the attic, the place we used to store everything we didn't want to part with, but didn't have the heart to keep in sight. In a dusty shoebox labeled Summer '95, I found a letter. Folded neatly, yellowing at the edges. It wasn't addressed to me, just titled, "Why I Stayed." I sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read. "Daniel, there are days when I wonder what it would be like to walk out and never come back. Not because I don't love you, but because I feel like a ghost in your life. We share a bed, a house, a daughter, but I can go days without you asking how I am. You remember every deal, every market shift, every stock split, but you forget my favorite flower, my dreams, even the date of our wedding sometimes." I stopped reading. Date of our wedding? I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar. June 14th. I had remembered it as June 12th for years. I searched the desk drawer and pulled out an old birthday card Emma had made when she was 5. Glitter still glued to the corners. "Happy birthday, Daddy," it read. The date was April 9th, not April 10th, as I'd written in every gift receipt since she turned 10. 2 simple days. 2 massive gaps in memory. 2 cracks I'd never seen forming. My hands trembled as I folded the letter, placing it back in the box. And then, for the first time in decades, I cried. Not because I was angry, not because I was ashamed, but because I finally saw myself through their eyes, not as a provider or protector, but as a man who'd slowly disappeared while pretending to be present. And there, in the stillness of an empty house, I realized something brutal. You can lose people long before they walk out the door. All it takes is forgetting the days that mattered most. Resignation wasn't the hard part. Typing it took 2 minutes. Hitting send took 3. What broke me was walking out of that building, my name still etched in glass on the door, and realizing no one chased after me. No, Daniel, don't do this. No applause. Just silence. I sold my shares 2 weeks later, liquidated the office condo, left the skyline behind. Melissa had moved to a quiet town 2 hours south, population barely above 2,000, a place with more deer than traffic lights. I found a listing for a rundown cabin on the edge of town. It had no internet, patchy cell reception, and squirrels that treated the porch as their kingdom. I bought it immediately. The first few mornings, I just sat, watching mist rise from the treetops, coffee cooling in my hands. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Redemption, punishment, a sign? Instead, I started to cook. Melissa used to say cooking was love made visible. I burned eggs, undercooked rice, and set off the smoke alarm 3 times. But the house began to smell like something human again, not corporate. I also started writing. Nothing profound, just small thoughts in a leather-bound journal. Memories of Emma, quotes from books I never finished, reflections I'd ignored for years, and poems. Yes, poems. Melissa once taught creative writing at the local library. Her favorite poet was Mary Oliver. I checked out every book she'd ever mentioned and underlined every line about loss, love, and regret. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries I didn't yet know how to use, I ran into a man near the produce aisle. He looked at me for a moment. "You're Melissa's husband." "Ex-husband, maybe," I said weakly. "I'm Tom. We were in high school together. She told me you moved here." We stood in awkward silence until he added, "You were the one who missed the hospital." I blinked. "Sorry?" Tom looked at the onions. "College, first year. Melissa was pregnant. You were too busy, I think. Or gone. She didn't talk about it much. Just said she went alone." I couldn't breathe. "She never told you?" I shook my head. "She said you weren't cruel, just absent. Like a ghost with a pulse." The air between us thickened. He didn't speak again, just nodded and walked away. I didn't finish my shopping. That night I sat by the fireplace in the cabin and tried to write a poem. Something about absence, about shadows that look like men. But the words didn't come. Because this wasn't about missing moments. It was about missing her pain, again and again, until she stopped offering it. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Can I come by tonight?" I stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed back, "Always." She arrived with a grocery bag and no makeup, her eyes tired but steady. She didn't hug me, just walked into the kitchen and started unpacking. "I brought pasta," she said. "I figured you'd screw that up the least." I smiled. We ate on mismatched plates. She twirled her fork in silence, then asked, "Why now?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Why now, Dad? Why do you suddenly know how to be a person who cares?" I set my fork down. "Because I ran out of excuses." She didn't blink. I spent most of my life telling myself that providing was enough, that love meant paying bills and keeping the lights on. But somewhere along the way, I stopped showing up. I stopped being someone worth coming home to. Emma nodded slowly, chewing her lip. I got up, went to the drawer, and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was your grandmother's," I said. "She left it to me. I always meant to give it to you when you were ready." Emma opened it. Inside was a silver ring, delicate and aged, a small sapphire at its center. "I'm sorry I didn't show up sooner," I said. She clutched the box tighter, and then, without looking at me, said, "I'm pregnant." The room froze. "I haven't told Mom yet," she added quickly. "Or anyone. I don't even know if I'm keeping it." I sat back down, heart racing. She looked up at me. "I'm scared, Dad. I keep thinking, what if I become you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "What if I work too much? Forget birthdays? Miss everything because I'm chasing some perfect life that doesn't exist?" I reached across the table, took her hand. "Then let this be your warning," I said softly. "Don't chase it. Be present. Love loudly. And when you're afraid, say it out loud. Don't hide." She nodded, wiping her cheek. We sat there, hands clasped, as the rain tapped the windows. And for the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't empty. It was healing. The first time I showed up to Melissa's yoga class, she didn't acknowledge me. I unrolled my mat in the back, stayed quiet, and nearly pulled a hamstring during downward dog. But I stayed the full hour. The next week, I returned. By the third class, she offered a nod. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. I started attending Emma's prenatal classes too. She was hesitant at first. There were side glances, awkward silences, but eventually, she let me sit beside her. She even laughed once when I couldn't figure out how to wrap the practice baby in a blanket. These weren't grand gestures. They were small, consistent acts. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't beg forgiveness. I just showed up. I learned Melissa went to the farmer's market every Saturday at 9. I did too. I didn't follow her around, just made sure we bumped into each other at the apple stand. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she didn't. Emma and I began having Sunday dinners. I cooked. She corrected. Once, she brought over a photo album, and we spent an hour identifying baby pictures. She didn't mention the pregnancy much, but one night she placed my hand on her belly and said, "He kicked when I heard you curse at the lasagna." That was the night I realized I might actually become a grandfather who mattered. Melissa remained distant, polite but guarded. I didn't blame her. Trust, once fractured, wasn't something you patched overnight. It had to be rebuilt, word by word, moment by moment. So I wrote. Every morning, for 60 straight days, I wrote Melissa a letter in a leather-bound journal. They weren't love letters exactly. Some were apologies, some were memories. Some were just thoughts. How the coffee tasted that morning. How I remembered her laugh during a snowstorm in '98. I didn't give them to her. Not yet. Then came Christmas. It had been years since we spent it together. Emma was nearing the final trimester, glowing and exhausted. I decorated the cabin with clumsy lights and a crooked tree. I didn't expect visitors. That morning, I opened the door to find Melissa standing there in a red coat, holding a small silver key. "Merry Christmas," she said. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, looking around. "Smells like you're learning how to use garlic." "I'm a slow learner," I replied. She handed me the key. "What's this?" "It's for the lake house." I froze. "But it's gone." Melissa shook her head. Turns out it wasn't. Carter never filed the final transfer. The buyer's remorse hit him after a week. Said he realized it wasn't the house. It was revenge. Our old neighbor, Harold, held onto the key. Said he'd wait 3 months to see if anyone regretted it. I stared at her, stunned. "You knew?" She nodded. "Harold called me, asked if I still wanted it sold. I said, I didn't know." She pulled something else from her coat, a small envelope. I read this last week, she said. Emma gave it to me. It was the journal. My letters. I only made it through 15 before I started crying. I haven't cried in a long time, Daniel. I swallowed hard. She stepped closer. I'm still angry, she said. Still hurt. I know. But I miss you. I didn't speak. I miss us. Before the silence, before the deals and the distance. I miss how you used to touch my back when I cooked. How we used to watch bad TV and laugh until Emma rolled her eyes. I miss you too, I whispered. She placed the key in my hand. Let's go back. The cabin was silent as we packed a few things. Blankets, tea, an old photo album. Emma stayed behind, promising to call if anything happened. The lake house stood just as I remembered it, weathered but waiting. We stepped onto the porch. This is where you proposed, Melissa said. In the rain. You forgot the ring. I improvised with a twist tie. She laughed softly. We sat on the swing, the wood creaking under our weight. Snow drifted around us, catching in her hair. She looked older, wiser, beautiful in the way only a woman who has survived love can be. I never hated you, she said quietly. I know. I just needed to know you could love without being the man in charge. I'm learning, I said. She reached into her coat, pulled out 2 mugs, and handed me one. Cocoa. Just like she used to make it, too sweet. We sat in silence. This time, the silence didn't hurt. It held us. I don't know what this is yet, she said. Not forgiveness. Not exactly. I'm not asking for labels. She nodded. Just time. Yes. We stayed there until the sun dipped behind the pines. 2 old lovers. 1 old house. A second chance. And in that moment, wrapped in flannel, memory, and something resembling grace, I realized we weren't rebuilding what we'd lost. We were building something entirely new. The cabin was never meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be a pause, a waiting room between the life I had and the one I was learning to live. But sometimes, in the quietest places, the most sacred transformations happen. We didn't make any announcements, no invitations. Just Melissa, me, Emma, and the town's retired pastor, who still wore his robe even for a Tuesday lunch. We stood in front of the fireplace, the smell of pine and cinnamon lingering in the air. Melissa wore a deep green dress, simple, elegant, her hair pulled back, face calm, eyes steady. She didn't look like a bride or a woman reclaiming something. She looked like a compass, pointing true north. I held her hands, slightly trembling, and spoke first. Years ago, I promised to build you a life of comfort, security, and success. And I did. I built towers, contracts, a business, but I forgot the foundation. I forgot you. I took a breath and pulled a folded page from my pocket. I wrote something, I said. Her smile told me to continue. I built empires with my hands, chased applause across the land. But while I won the world outside, I lost the kingdom by your side. I climbed to peaks of cold, dry air, forgetting warmth was always there. I raised my voice in marble halls, but missed your whisper down the hall. I built so much I couldn't see. The crown I wore was not for me. For what is gold if it can't gleam in the eyes of the one who shares your dream? I've laid down bricks. I've laid down pride. But now I stand here by your side. No greater vow, no deeper plea. Let love be all I leave to thee. A silence followed. Not the tense kind, but full, deep, sacred. Melissa squeezed my hand. Her vows were shorter, but every word landed. I don't need you to be perfect, she said. I need you to be present. That was more than enough. Emma gave birth on a windy spring morning, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I was in the hospital lobby, carrying a half-eaten bagel and a lukewarm coffee when a nurse called my name. "Grandpa?" she asked, smiling. "You're up." The doors opened, and there he was, 8 pounds, wrinkled, red, angry at the world. He looked just like Emma when she was born, furrowed brow and clenched fists. They placed him in my arms, and for the first time, I understood something I never had before. Legacies aren't built through achievements. They're cradled in moments like this, in warm blankets, in tiny hiccups, in being the first set of arms he ever knew. I looked down and whispered, "You have no idea how long I've waited to get this right." Melissa stood behind me, tears in her eyes. "He's perfect," she said. I nodded. So is she. Emma slept peacefully, exhausted and glowing, her hand curled around the edge of the bedrail, the silver ring I'd given her glinting under the sterile lights. We didn't speak much that night. We didn't need to. We were all there, together. 2 weeks later, I sat at the cabin's desk and began writing a letter. Not for Emma, not for Melissa. For him. For my grandson. I didn't know what he'd be like, what he'd grow to love, whether he'd be shy or wild, quiet or bold. But I knew one thing. One day, the world would ask him to choose. Between power and presence. Between winning and being with the ones who matter. And I wanted him to hear my voice before that moment came. To my grandson, if you're reading this, it means you're old enough to wrestle with the question we all face eventually. What matters more, success or love? I can't answer for you, but I can tell you what I learned too late. Success is addictive. It's loud, shiny, praised, but it's also hungry. And if you're not careful, it will eat everything quiet and sacred in your life. Your time, your peace, your people. Love is quieter. It's in canceled meetings, in holding someone's hand during nothing special. It's in choosing to stay when you could leave. It's not always celebrated, but it's always remembered. So when you must choose the place where someone calls you the most important person in the room. Choose the kitchen conversation, the birthday, the ordinary Tuesday. That's where life happens. That's where legacy lives. Love boldly, show up fully, and never ever wait until it's almost too late like I did. Grandpa, I folded the letter and slipped it into a small wooden box labeled, "To be opened at 18. Then I stepped outside. Melissa was painting the cabin door a fresh shade of lake blue. I joined her. "What should we call this place now?" I asked. She smiled. "You decide." I thought for a moment, then walked over to the old mailbox. I pulled out a black marker, scratched out the old faded numbers and wrote, "The Lake House 2. She raised an eyebrow. "It's not the lake," I said, "but it's where we found our way back." She stepped beside me and took my hand. And this time," she whispered, "we build it right from the beginning." We stood there watching the paint dry, the trees sway, the world breathe, and in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just rebuilt a marriage, or a home, or a family. I'd built a legacy, one quiet choice at a time.